How can you create your own custom vignette and get past the limitations of the post-crop vignette tool? I'm going to show you my way in Photoshop.
Here I am where the movie started, freezing at a photo they've taken. Space tree flying through the skies and petals apple everywhere.
Hey everybody, Josh Mills here, Josh Mills Photography. Today I'm going to show you all how to create your own custom vignette in Photoshop. This will allow you to get past the limitations of the custom vignette tool that you usually find in Lightroom, Adobe Camera Raw, or other applications like Capture One. The reason I like to create my own custom vignette is it gives me full control of what my vignette looks like. It allows me to follow contours or place the vignette in certain areas of the frame, whereas the post-crop vignette tool that you find in Lightroom or other applications is very limited. It is a vignette that is either circular or elliptical in shape, and it just comes in from the corners of your frame. Okay, so here's the image I'm going to use to demonstrate. This is a natural light boudoir shot that I recently took. And what I would like to do is add a vignette to bring your eye's attention more to her face and upper torso than what's going on in the background. I already did a pretty good job in the way I shot it by using a very shallow depth of field, but I really want to draw that attention to her face and eyes. So I'm going to add a custom vignette.
But first, I want to point out how a lot of people typically add a vignette to their images. Now, a lot of people add their vignette at the end of their retouching, which is what I typically do also, and they usually use the built-in vignette tools in Photoshop or Lightroom or Capture One. Those vignette tools basically come and bring in a vignette from the corners of the image, and they give you very limited control over the shape and position of that vignette. So what I'm talking about, I'm going to give you an example, and I'll just use Adobe Camera Raw filter just to show you. And this is the same thing that you would see in Lightroom or Capture One or any other editing software. So let me create a new layer, and we will go ahead and open that in the Camera Raw. So in Lightroom, Camera Raw, any other photo editing, there's usually a vignette tool. And in Camera Raw, it's located under the FX panel. Now, what this vignette tool allows you to do is add a vignette, and it can be a black vignette or dark vignette, or it can be a bright vignette or white vignette. And just so we can see exactly what's going on, I'm going to go ahead and take the feathering all the way down to 0, and we will go ahead and crank this all the way down so you can see the shape that the tool is creating the vignette here. So basically what you're left with to do is you can choose the size, so how much it comes in from the corners of the image, and you can choose the shape, which varies from an elliptical to a circular. So the limitation here is basically you're still limited to how far you are coming in from the corners and a very limited shape. So you've got, round and elliptical. So now I have added a vignette with the post-crop vignette tool that is available in obviously Photoshop, Camera Raw, Lightroom, and even in Capture One. What I don't like about this is that limitation of just coming in from the corners and not being able to use it in a way that I can follow contours. So that's very limiting to me, and it really is not a good tool if your subject is not in the center of the frame. What I have found that works for me the best is creating my own custom vignette. So I'm going to go ahead and hide this layer and show you what I'm talking about. What I use to do this is actually the Lasso Tool, which you can see right over here on our panel, and I use it with a solid color adjustment layer. So over here from your adjustment layers in your layer panel, you will see solid color usually right at the top of the menu. Let's go ahead and jump in.
By the way guys, one of the things that I like to do for tasks that I do frequently in Photoshop is go ahead and create an action. So if you want to go ahead and create an action as we go through this tutorial, let me go ahead and show you how to do that.
So if you open up your action panels, which is this play looking symbol, if you don't have it, you can always go over to Window and make sure that the actions are checked, and then it should appear somewhere over in your windows over here. And let's go ahead and let me get rid of that one. Let's go ahead and create a new action. So if you click on the little bars icon up here and go to new action, and let's call it custom vignette. And we will go ahead and hit record. Now I don't want to start recording yet, so I'm going to go ahead and stop it, because we don't want to record our lasso tool for the action because it will always change. So let's go ahead and grab our lasso tool, and the feathering can be 0, 1 pick to 5 picks, doesn't matter. Basically we're just using it to create a shape. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say on this image I want to create a vignette that follows the contour of her body. And in addition to that, I want it to affect her legs, which are in the background, more than her upper torso and face, which is in the foreground where the light is actually coming from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a shape starting very close to her legs. And then as I come up the contour of her body, I'm going to gradually get further away until I am way out here. And then I'm going to go out of the screen so that I'm not affecting the top of her head and hair. And then I will probably just clip this corner and maybe bring in a couple little shadows along the bottom edge and wrap back up around. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're good to go. So now what I've done is I've made the initial shape that I want my vignette to be. At this point, if you're creating an action, let's go ahead and hit record. The first thing you want to do after you've made that selection is to invert that selection. So you can hit Control, Shift, and I on the keyboard, which will invert your selection, or you can go up to the Select menu and go to Inverse. That will basically make it select this outer area instead of the inner area that you had just lassoed. At this point, we're going to go ahead and go down to our layer adjustments, our adjustment layers, and we are going to choose solid color. Now here, depending on what kind of vignette you want to do, you can choose white, which is 6 Fs, or you can choose black, which is 6 zeros. I'm going to go ahead and choose black just so I can show you what we're doing here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And then the very next step we're going to do is change the layer style to soft light. You can also use overlay, but I find that to be a little bit less subtle, a little harsher, so I always use soft light. The next thing you want to do is make sure and come over to that layer and select the layer mask. If you do not select the layer mask, when we go over here to the filter to blur it, you will get an error, and that will be the reason why you are not able to use the Gaussian blur. If you get that error, make sure to come back over here and select your layer mask. So we will go up to the filters, we will go to blur, and we will go to Gaussian blur. Basically what we're doing here is we are now blurring the edges of that layer mask. And the whole point of this is to go from a rough edge to a very gradiated blend. Right now I'm on a 36 megapixel image, so I know that I need to be up in probably the 600 to 700 range. Let's say 650-ish is a good number for me. And you can see I've got a nice gradation of dark to light now coming through. If you don't see this, it's probably because you don't have the preview button ticked. So make sure you have the preview button ticked. And we'll go ahead and hit OK. That should be the end of your action, so go ahead and click stop. One more thing that you want to do is you want to go ahead and click right there and create a stop on the Gaussian blur of the action. What this will allow you to do is when you run the action, it will prompt you to choose how much blur you want. So as you're working on different images, you can use different amounts of blur with the same action. All right. The one last thing that I want to show you here is if the vignette is too heavy-handed, you can just adjust the opacity of the layer. So I usually do find it to be very heavy-handed, so I usually bump it down to 50% or less. So let's go ahead and put it right there in that 50% range. Toggle it on and off, see how it looks. Looks good to me. So just to show you a difference here, I'm going to go ahead and bring it back up to 100%. You can see how as I toggle it on and off, it does affect her legs here and the shadow on the backside of her arm. It affects this lower front part of the bed, and it affects all of this background back here, but it really doesn't affect her face and upper torso. It only affects what I want it to, and it follows the contour that I want it to follow. Now, in comparison, here is the vignette from Adobe Camera Raw. You can see it comes in on the corners, but everything else, there's a bright spot up here. You know, the legs are bright. And there's the difference. And that's why I prefer to use my own custom Gaussian blur. So, for those of you who did create an action, we have it up here. Let's go ahead and get rid of our layers. And you can see what the action does. All right, so we'll make sure and grab our lasso tool. And then we will go ahead and make our selection. I'm just going to do this quickly, just to show you what the action actually does now. And we will go over to our actions panel, make sure that the top of our action custom vignette is selected, and we will go ahead and play it. What it does is it then takes, inverses the selection, and goes ahead, changes the layer style to soft light, and then opens the Gaussian blur, and it will default to whatever your last Gaussian blur setting was, but it allows you to choose a different setting here. So if I decide that, you know, 650 was too much for me, I can go, let's say 585, and go ahead and hit OK. And then the action is complete, and I have my Gaussian blur layer, and all I need to do is change the opacity to suit to taste for how much I want the effect to apply.
Alright guys, that wraps it up. That's creating a custom vignette in Photoshop using the Lasso Tool and a solid color adjustment layer. Let me know what you think in the comments. Ask any questions that you may have. Make sure and like and subscribe.
Here I am where the movie started, Vignette, a photo they've taken. Space tree flying through the skies and petals apple everywhere.